This is the great bustard. It is an icon of the old chalk grassland sheep and corn landscape. You can see them today on Salisbury Plain, where chalk grassland survives at a landscape scale. This is a boy bustard in his courting finery, posing for the girls. Bustards were the megafauna of chalk grassland in historical times. This film follows up one we made in 2020, which was called Brighton's Big Secret, the Downland We Own. That first film was about the problems of Brighton Council's 13,000-acre downland estate. This film illustrates in a more detailed way something we could only touch on in that last film, the glories of chalk grassland. It is an attempt to go through the back of the wardrobe and enter the world of chalk grassland, which is the richly biodiverse and greatly threatened ecosystem that once covered much of our downs. Its richness is partly the product of geology, for the chalky soils are naturally biodiverse, and the water-retaining qualities of the chalk mean that the many plants with deep roots can tap into a water supply rather than dying in drought conditions. It is an ecosystem that is partly natural and partly nurtured by people to produce food and clothing, wool, dung to fertilise the cornlands, meat and milk. It is a world in miniature, and most of the species in it are small or tiny. You often need a magnifying glass to see them better. But it is a world of great beauty and colour, at its best like a glorious tapestry, or a garment set with jewels. It was a coat of many colours, though that coat is now tatty and mangled. Most of us know very little of this ecosystem, for it has been terribly damaged over the past century and more, and fewer folk survive who have direct memories of it in its glory. It survives only as tattered fragments, mostly on steep slopes, often forbidden to the public, and often separated from the rights-of-way system. Our film works by getting some of the leading experts on chalk grassland and its wildlife to talk about the special things that they love. We've divided the film up into chapters, and we think you may like to look at it in that way, bit by bit, so as best to relish the detail of things that are shown and their stories. Most surviving chalk grassland is on steep slopes, too steep for the plough. Watch out for some sites which look like chalk grassland and not, despite sharing the dull shades of green and fawn that often indicate unimproved grasslands. Irregularities such as bushes, anthills, dips, hollows, tumps may all hint that chalk grassland is present. Sadly, much surviving chalk grassland can be identified from the invasive scrub it has developed. This chalk grassland has recovered from what was ploughland 180 years ago. Scruffiness and roughness, indicating lack of grazing, is often a sign of the presence of chalk grassland, albeit in a neglected state. Despite looking natural, this site was improved long ago. These sites north of Southwick form a string of long derelict fragments along steep valley sides with much hawthorn and gorse. You can only definitely tell whether a site is biodiverse and ancient by looking closely at its flowers and grasses and its history. Most of this landscape was chalk grassland before 1947, when the post-war plough-ups really began. Much of it is now pasture again, but the work has not yet been done to return its biodiverse character. Scrub still encroaches on the tiny fragments of archaic pasture that survive. This high scarp down pasture all looks quite natural and similar, but the chalk grassland to the right was destroyed by a flyover aircraft spraying agri-chemicals perhaps half a century ago. It became a coarse, tussocky, simplified, banal mess. The Downs chalk grasslands can seem bare and uninviting in winter, but if you hunker down and look closely, preferably with a magnifier, you'll see another world of colour and beauty in miniature.
Okay. I'm Sue Rubinstein. I'm a joint bryophyte recorder for Sussex, which are mosses, liverworts and hornworts. And we're looking at the fantastic mosses of chalk grassland. So mostly mosses and one or two liverworts in this amazing site. And these steep north-facing slopes are particularly good for mosses because they're cool and damp. They don't get the sun in the winter. And there's these fantastic things, Homolothecium lutescens all over this anthill, and the chalk comb moss, Ctenidium, this little curly thing, and lots in between. So, yeah, I think we're probably in about the best site, in the Brighton area. So yeah, this amazing chalk pit here, I think there's at least 100 different species of moss and liverwort have been recorded here. Yeah, we're always finding new things. It's always possible to find more, and possible to miss things as well.
Big shaggy moss is one of a group of vigorous mosses that can make glorious moss gardens in some spots on the Downs North slopes.
It's Rhytidiodelphus squarosus, which is lawn moss that you get, on everybody's lawns, but also on chalk grassland, and it's related to the shaggy moss, the Rhytidiodelphus trichectrus. Barbula, I think.
Vitias are the ones that the sheep, they love the sheep terracets, don't they?
Yeah.
Because they're a stable habitat.
Yes, and they like these vertical soil banks. So they often get them by paths, in the steep sides of paths, covered in capsules. Necera crispa, or crisped necera. So you get it on the north-facing down slopes. So this is one of the large physidens. I think it's probably Physidens dubius. And it grows on the north slopes, and it's sort of as if somebody's bunched a load of shoots and stuffed them into the ground. It always looks quite messy. But then actually when you separate the shoots, it's got these really neatly arranged leaves. I don't know if you can see. It's called a pocket moss. I think it's chalk grasslands has more moss species than any other type of grassland.
Does it?
Yeah.
Many of these tiny plants, particularly the lichen, can seem otherworldly, alien, from the planet Zog, hardly like living things at all. Yet they are amongst our most ancient life forms.
Here's a lovely bit of Ctenidium molluscum, the chalk comb moss, and with little bits of Ditricum gracile growing through it, this very fine green moss here.
Steep places like this old chalk pit are the best.
Hi, my name's Dave Goulson. I'm Professor of Biology at the University of Sussex, and I'm a specialist in insects. I've been interested in insects all my life, particularly bumblebees. When I was a kid, we literally got them in my garden in Shropshire.
Really?
Yeah, they were everywhere.
Good Lord.
I mean, sadly, you know, I have to admit, I used to collect butterflies,
Yeah, wow.
as lots of people did when they were kids a long time ago. Still there.
Well, we could have a go.
You might as well try, because it's a species that's massively declined. Unfortunately, it's under a bramble.
Yeah.
You didn't want your net without holes in it, did you?
Oh, don't play that. No, do what you want with it. That's it. Yeah. Got it, you got it.
I mean, it's not really well understood why these have declined so much. And so just the sort of, you know, the ubiquity of kind of highly fertilised soils these days means that there's not much habitat left that actually has food plant that they can thrive on. I don't think anyone knows for sure, but it's one of the theories as to why they've declined. But these were everyday butterflies when I was a kid. I mean, you know, we're going back to the 1970s now, and we know lots of species have declined hugely.
And it's a special occasion every time you find it now.
Yeah, it's a couple of years since I've seen one of these.
Wall.
A wall butterfly. It's a strange name, really. I mean, I have seen them basking on walls. Maybe that's why they're called a wall butterfly.
Yeah.
Lovely camouflaged underside. When their wings are shut, they just disappear.
Yeah.
But,
and why? Who are they? I suppose it's birds those eyes are directed at, isn't it? It's got
to be. Yeah.
Right, Wally Irons Hut.
They are. Must be the UK's most unspectacular butterfly, and appropriately named, but they're still kind of sweet, aren't they?
They are sweet, yeah. And perfectly coloured for the chalk grassland at this time of year, which is dingy, isn't it? It's dingy.
Yeah. Very moth-like, aren't they? I mean,
they are.
Most sort of ordinary folk would have that as a moth. But well, skippers as a group are fairly moth-like, but this one more than most. I'll let this one go. We've got a close-up, haven't we?
Oh well.
Off you go.
We missed the grizzled skipper is the dingy skipper's more boldly patterned cousin. It occurs around the same times and places as dingy skipper, though with different caterpillar food plants.
A month or so ago I was coming past and there was the farmer spraying what was probably, for the time of year, would have been an insecticide, right up to, you know, the edge of a nature reserve, and it just kind of illustrates how precarious these little islands are. And you know, if you think historically, this would have just been part of a massive tract of similar rich habitat stretching, you know, to east and west from where we're standing, and it's all,
from Eastbourne to Winchester.
It's all been smashed into little tiny pieces now.
And actually, if you go beyond, you can see the edge of the chalk pit there, and if you go beyond that onto the scarp between there and Glyndebourne, that's all sprayed.
It's bleak. There's nothing to it.
There's nothing there.
No life at all.
You'd look at it from the Ringmer Road, and you'd think, "Oh, that's nice. A lovely bit of chalk grass and scarp." There's nothing there.
No.
Nothing there.
It's quite sad actually that a lot of people don't really question, you know, what the landscape has become like. I went to there was a one-day meeting 4 or 5 years ago now about the South Downs National Park and its sort of future and how it should be managed and aspirations. And someone put up a picture of the sort of landscape with these giant fields that we're used to. You know, some of them pasture, some of them arable, but all of them more or less lifeless.
Yeah, desert.
And said, you know, look at this beautiful landscape. How do we ensure that we keep this for the future? And at the end of their talk, I put my hand up and said, why do we want to keep this awful landscape for the future? It's terrible. And everyone looked at me as if I was some kind of maniac. But,
yeah.
But actually, to me, most of the Downs is really depressing. It's bleak and lifeless.
It's a wrecked landscape.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, it's a miracle that it became a national park. Really, it shows the strength of that historical, cultural welly which the landscape did have from that cultural memory of 2 or 3 generations ago, when the Downs really did have the qualities you're talking about,
absolutely.
wall to wall, you know, archaic chalk grassland, you know.
Yeah, and it's
one
really,
end of the county
it's
to
not
the
that
other.
long ago either, really. I mean,
It's not. I mean,
those sort of figures for species-rich grassland generally, you know, that between 1930 and 1987, we lost 97% of the UK's flower-rich grasslands.
Yeah.
And actually, chalk downland did slightly better than the average. The lowland hay meadows were just completely obliterated.
Yeah, destroyed.
But even the downland, you know, the large proportion of it was swept away in that same period. And now, in sort of one generation, really, we've gone from a landscape that was just kind of a continuous mass of life, all sorts of amazing butterflies and bees and everything else, to little
broken
islands.
fragments, broken islands. Like the dog had got at some precious tapestry or something, and all you've got left is these tatty fragments
little remnants
blowing around. You know, it is a major tragedy, really.
But I guess that the thing is, what we need to be pushing for is for them to be linked up again, to restore some of this land.
Yeah.
'Cause it's not. One of the frustrating things is it's not particularly productive land to farm it as arable land.
No.
You have to pour loads of chemicals on because it's not fertile.
And even then, you're getting lower activity than you would on equivalent ground of, you know, more capacity,
more fertile land elsewhere.
The stuff down there. Yeah.
So it's kind of, why did we do this? Why are we continuing to, you know, subsidise intensive farming of land that would be much better used for wildlife?
Yeah. And for people, because I mean the good thing about this is that actually people and nature coexist very well here. You know, that there's no great harms we do here really by our presence. You know, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be here. You know.
Yeah, well, I mean, this site particularly has this really long history of human management, interference, digging holes. The whole landscape is kind of man-made, but benefits from it. It's more diverse than it would be otherwise.
Yeah.
These mating tussles by boy adders were as much part of the old open downland sheep walks in early spring as boxing hares or wheezing yellowhammers. These beautiful adders are not harming each other and are not aggressive to us, as you can see. Cowslips form the first great springtime floral display. The coombe bottoms have thicker soils and a different community of plants, and crosswort is often present there. With the cowslips come the early spider orchids with their powerful sexual insect mimicry, though it's male solitary wasps they want to attract, not spiders. And the turf is graced by milkwort's tiny dabs of blue. Here is the rare burnt tip orchis with horseshoe vetch, bird's foot trefoil, bulbous buttercup, salad burnet, and the leaves of many later flowering herbs and grasses. Here's our oldest friend, quaking grass, totter grass, Rice Krispies grass, wibble wobble grass, our constant companion in old pastures green. A different milkwort this time, the rare chalk milkwort, often white. You might think you know little hairy rock cress, Arabis hirsuta, but I doubt most of you do, for she is only found in the best quality remnants of old chalk grassland. You may confuse her with bittercress or early whitlow grass that can both cover old anthills in early spring. It's grazing and trampling that wildlife-rich chalk grassland depends upon. These flowers have evolved to be grazed. Without it, we lose them. All the birds of these rough pastures are busiest in Maytime. Peter Hodge has been studying beetles in Sussex since the 1950s. He knows the beetles of downland in great depth.
Right, this is a beetle called Cryptocephalus aureolus, and it's a pot beetle is the common name.
Pot beetle?
The larvae live in pots, little cases that they build out of their own excrement. And the head of the larva fits exactly into the neck of the pot.
Good Lord, so they're a bit like land caddis.
Yeah, which keeps all the predators out.
Right.
And the larvae just eat dried leaves and things that are on the ground.
But she is exceptionally beautiful, this one, isn't she? And you're right. You just find them nestling in flowers, don't they?
Yeah.
They've made themselves a sunbed.
That's right. The other thing that these do, as the larva grows, they unzip the pot and stitch a bit in.
Good Lord.
Which makes the pot bigger.
So they put a fresh gutter in.
Yeah, so they live in exactly the same spot for their entire life. But as they grow,
they stitch in another bit.
Yeah, quite clever.
That's amazing.
The other interesting thing about all Cryptocephalus,
and all Cryptocephalus are pot beetles like that.
Yes,
they all do that.
Larvae develop on the ground.
Yeah.
The eggs would be laid typically from a flower like that.
Right.
The female will lay an egg into its hind feet and hold the egg between its hind feet.
Yeah.
And then they rotate the egg and cover it with a pattern of excrement.
Good Lord.
And then when they've done that all the way around, and it probably would take them half an hour to do that, and they just toss the egg into the air and it lands on the ground.
So they've kind of given it a shell, a bit, you know, but it doesn't happen inside the oviduct like with a chicken.
No, and
they do it externally with their own poo.
Each egg has a different excrement patterns on it, so you can probably identify the egg from the pattern. Many eggs in their lifetime.
I think I thought it was called a pot beetle because it was cylindrical, a bit like a pot.
And Cryptocephalus means hidden head.
Yes.
I mean, if magnified, you can clearly see that the head is tucked underneath the pronotum.
Yeah. The pronotum being the shoulders.
Through spring and summer, bloody-nosed beetles lumber over downland paths and turf. They are flightless, and the larvae and adults feed on various bedstraws. When threatened, it secretes a distasteful red liquid from its mouth to scare off predators. Don't provoke it though, as I did. Sorry! One spring we found 38 fat larvae of the large bloody-nosed beetle scattered along a hillside path, all gorgeous iridescent greeny black. Small bloody-nosed beetles eat the same bedstraw food plants and live with their larger cousins in the same spots on the South Downs. Look out for this beauty where its ground ivy food plant occurs, on scruffy rabbit grazed ground, perhaps on scrub edges. Can you see she's got reddish feet? Burnet Rose loves seaside sand dunes and ancient chalk grassland near the coast. It's extremely spiny and often short enough to sit on by mistake. Ouch! It has purplish black hips and often hosts bright red pea-galls. Pride of Sussex rampion is often used as a symbol of the Sussex Downs, for this is its British headquarters. Invasive tallgrass elbows out most other chalk grassland flowering plants, as you can see here. It flourishes because of nitrogen air pollution. Sheep's fescue is the backbone of intact chalk grassland. It's the little yellow-brown cigar-shaped male spikelets of spring sedge that you'll first spot. Finding it is always a good omen. Poor little field woodrush is scarcely noticed by anyone, but it doesn't care, for it's to be found growing happily all over most unimproved grassland everywhere. You expect sedges to be in marshes, but glaucous sedge likes nothing better than waterless chalk grassland. It's robust and can survive an absence of grazing, as here, whilst false oak grass flourishes on such derelict chalk grasslands. Glaucous sedge is a great producer of seeds.
My name's Neil Hulme. I've been passionate, if not obsessed, with butterflies for over 50 years now, and I work as an independent advisor for the South Downs National Park Authority, landowners, farmers, foresters, always with a view to improving the lot of butterflies in Sussex, whether that be on chalk grassland or in woodlands. And it's a real passion of mine, and fortunately now a job too.
This is Mill Hill, once known as Shoreham Bank, and nationally the most famous of all Sussex butterfly localities, since the 1820s at least. Nowadays it is most famous for Adonis Blue, but in those days it was the Chalk Hill Blue that was sought.
Yeah, I mean, as you were saying, I mean, people used to come down from London here, didn't they? You know,
they did. It was
been coming down from London since the railway opened.
They were collectors in those days, of course. People these days collect with a camera. To go away with hundreds would, even in those days, would have been considered irresponsible collecting. Responsible collectors would have gone home with, you know, what the real enthusiast after was the aberrant forms, those which differ significantly from the standard pattern. So you would get them collectors coming down on the train from London and spending an entire day, if not an entire week, just sifting through the population in the evening, looking at the undersides in particular for those bizarre patterns where the spots sort of dribble or the spots are reduced. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these aberrants which are named, and they would actually change hands for considerable sums of money. Because of course, you know, the horseshoe vetch is now in flower, but if you were to go back a month, you would have found the caterpillars crawling around in here. And invariably when you find the caterpillar, you find it in association with ants, because they have this fantastic complex relationship with ants. It doesn't matter with the Adonis Blue, it doesn't matter whether it's a black, a yellow or a red ant. And the ant then drums on its honey glands at the rear of the caterpillar, and the caterpillar exudes this lovely sugary substance which provides a large proportion of the energy needs of an entire ant's nest. So this sugar they produce is really important to the ants. And in return for that sugar solution, the the caterpillar gets protection from potential predators, and they will build little cells of soil in the evening and keep guard over the caterpillars. And ultimately they'll take the caterpillars down into their nests underground, and there the caterpillar forms a pupa. And even the pupa can communicate with the ants. It can flex. It's got a comb-like structure, and by flexing, even the chrysalis can make these high-pitched squeaks, which is literally music to an ant's ear. They keep it happy, they suppress it, they don't see it as a threat.
Yes.
They look after it. And then after about 3 weeks in the upper chambers of an ant's nest, the adult will hatch out. Its wings will of course still be collapsed and soft. It will be escorted up to the surface by the ants, which are still running all over its body sometimes. It'll crawl up onto low vegetation and then pump hemolymph, it's the equivalent of our blood, into its wings to expand them. And over the course of an hour or two, the wings will dry off, they'll harden off, and the butterfly then takes its first flight. So it's this really critical relationship with the ant and the caterpillar. That's why, you know, you've got everything here that an Adonis Blue could ever want. You've got the horseshoe vetch, so you've got the caterpillar's food plant, you've got an abundance of ants which love all of this bare soil and the lovely warm habitat here. The ants look after the caterpillar gives a little gift back to the ants, everybody's happy, and as a result, you know, you've got a lovely strong population of Adonis Blues here. There we go, look at that. Beautiful electric blue.
Yeah, extraordinary. A piece of the sky.
Yeah.
A piece of the sky.
Field Fleawort is found on the shortest swards and is very faithful to the oldest down pastures, so it's rare. Its woolly stem and leaves, like Edelweiss, may indicate its alpine and boreal origin. It also likes old trackways, as on this bostel bank, hill forts, ancient chalk pits and flint mines, particularly of the Iron Age. Perhaps those people brought it here. In May and June, many chalk grassland flowers are yellow, like these, to attract little flies and solitary bees. All these three species need short grazed swards, though their life strategies are very different. Rock rose is a woody subshrub, despite its fragile appearance. Bulbous buttercup has a yellow fold-back collar under each flower. Horseshoe vetch, growing here on an anthill, has leaves that are ranked like rose leaves in a ladder, whereas lookalike bird's foot trefoil has trifoliate leaves like clover. Rock rose likes anthills too, as do thyme and many chalk grassland ephemerals like whitlow grass and bittergrass. We're talking about snails here, snails of the dry downs.
Well, my name's Martin Willing, and I'm here today in beautiful Anchor Bottom actually, to look at chalk grassland snails. I've been asked to come today because I'm county recorder. I have been for quite a number of years now, county recorder for Sussex. And I've also, until about a year ago, I was conservation officer of the Conchological Society.
People used to say it's the snails they eat that give South Downs sheep mutton its flavour, and the heath snail is one of the big juicy snails.
There are accounts of sheep on the South Downs, on the coastal slopes, leaning over the cliff to try to get hold of the heath snail and other similar snails. Right, this is really, so it's not extinct on the Brighton Downs. This is really good news, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we have found a population on the Brighton Downs of this in really quite rare and declining species. The name heath snails, it's pretty daft really, because it's not found on acid heaths. It's found on well, in southern England it's particularly found on chalk grasslands. Occasionally, as you go north, it's found on sand dunes and coastal areas where you get wind-blown sand coming in. But it's a really good indicator of the best chalk grassland sites. And this site has got pretty much everything that heath snails like. First of all, they like short, relatively short vegetation. They'll tolerate a little bit of height, but bare ground seems to be an important factor. And sites can be up to 50% bare actually, poached by cattle. They don't seem to mind cattle grazing. And another factor is that on all the sites that I've seen on the South Downs and indeed on Salisbury Plain, you always get these where you get south-facing or near south-facing slopes. You don't ever get them on the north-facing side of a coombe or a valley.
Yep.
And they're quite big. I mean, they're easy to distinguish from similar wrinkled and banded snails, because they've got this very wide sort of belly button, if you like. It's called an umbilicus. And they whirl out quite extremely, and they're quite shallow snails if you look at them sideways.
They're flat.
They're not conical. They're relatively flattened.
Yes.
So anybody watching this video that thinks they've found a population of these, then get in touch. We'd really like to know where they are, so we can record their presence and hopefully conserve them.
Sheep grazing can harm heath snails by eating them out. They need cattle grazing. On 3 Brighton sites, conservation sheep grazing has recently destroyed this rarity.
There are 2 much smaller snails. If I put a scale next to that, that's a centimetre scale, you get an idea how tiny these are.
And that is called?
Well, this is called, the Latin name, Pupilla muscorum. There's got various English names. If we call it the moss chrysalis snail.
And they do look like tiny chrysalids.
They do look like an insect chrysalis.
Yeah.
But these are really interesting because they don't colonise very well. In fact, many of the scarcer molluscs are good indicators of old chalk grassland, because they don't, unlike insects, fly from site to site. So if they're at a site, if this thing is at a site, it means it's been there for a very long time. It means a number of things, that site's been chalk grassland possibly for thousands of years. It also means that the site's been kept short by grazing sheep or cattle or possibly deer as well. These are dead specimens of Beda sacali. I think it's got a number of English names. The large chrysalis snail, or you call it the scree chrysalis snail. And there's a huge species diversity of these things in the Pyrenees. There's often one species per mountain.
Good Lord,
yeah.
Good Lord. And I tell you what I really like about this snail. I like the fact that it's got a mouthful of teeth.
Yeah.
And it really looks as though it needs dental work, doesn't it? It
little
really
folds
does.
of shell is what we're referring to by teeth, rather than teeth that bite you. And the idea of this is, do you know what that is, Dave? Why they have those?
No.
Well, quite a lot of these small snails, the chrysalis snails and the whirl snails, have these folds of shell which we call teeth in the mouth, and that's so that when they squeeze back into the shell, because they've got flexible bodies, they can get past those. But insects with a fixed body, and a lot of insects will eat snails, can't get into the mouth, so it reduces the effective aperture size.
Point snails also love chalky and particularly coastal grasslands. As we walked away, we found these gorgeous bee orchids. In these lovely down pastures there are always new sights, both strange and beautiful, for our delight.
I'm Paul Harms. I'm the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland's former county recorder. They now call me Recorder Emeritus. What a wonderful title. But I'm still, I've been interested in plants for the last, getting on for 60 years now, like your good self. And it's just been an obsession over the years. Anything to do with being out on natural history was fantastic. As a kid, my parents didn't have the money for holidays and stuff like that. We used to spend our time on the downs. We lived on it, and it was just over the fence at the back of your garden, and off you went. And you used to take notice of, you know, those little chrysalises on the side of the grass when you saw the little black bit coming out. What on earth's that? I sat and watched one. Burnet moth. Burnet moth. Yeah. Sat and watched one of those, and you take notice of the things that are around you, and it's, you know, it just sticks. And I narrowed down to doing plants, and I've now been lucky enough over the years. I mean, I was an electrical engineer by profession, but I was lucky enough to lead a lot of botanical tours abroad to lots of fabulous places. So I've been very, very fortunate. But I still. Sussex and the Downs is still where I live. It's where I'm based.
That's great.
That's great. We're on Malling Down near Lewes on the north side of the town, on the scarp slope of the Downs, which is the north facing slope, and very good chalk grassland. Plenty of orchids at this time of the year, which is June. We've got common spotted orchid, very tall, pale, fairly common.
Yeah.
Appears quite a lot.
Yeah.
But just beside it and behind it, you've got 3 spikes of musk orchid.
You'd think that an orchid that was growing in dry, short chalk grassland would be an orchid that was not vulnerable to drought.
No, it's very shallowly rooted.
It's shallowly rooted and very vulnerable to drought.
Yeah.
So what? It's an odd strategy, isn't it?
It's also, you know, it likes to be wet, but it likes to be drained because you're on a hillside. You'll only ever, if you ever go looking for these, you only ever look on a north-facing slope.
And you'll have a hard time finding it.
We mentioned earlier that we're going to do a quadrat. A quadrat is a metre by a metre by a metre by a metre square, 4 square metre. And we're going to identify the species that we can find growing within just this square. It doesn't count on the outside, it only counts on the inside. We're trying to demonstrate the diversity of chalk grassland from a plant perspective. Well, we'll start with a grass. Let's start with Catapodium.
Which is that?
Fern grass.
And it looks ferny, doesn't it?
Yeah, it looks like a fern. Yeah, as I said, so fern grass. And this purple here and here and here, not to be confused with the thyme, is self-heal. Then we've got ribwort plantain.
Millie folium, and millie is 1,000, so 1,000 bits of leaf, I suppose that means.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, there's a buttercup like that on the continent.
And here we are. What about this, Paul?
Purging flax.
No, I don't think it is. Have a look. I think it's a little mouse ear, isn't it?
You've got mouse-eared hawkweed.
Okay.
Which is a solitary headed as opposed to multi-headed. This has got lots of yellow heads.
So
this has just got one. Smooth hawk's beard. And this is mouse-eared hawkweed. The issue with English plant names or colloquial names. Just in here, again, you can just see me moving its head, is time-leaf sandwort.
If we've got many more.
Well, we've got Carex flacca here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, didn't think we had any of that. Good.
Yeah, I just got it on the leaves.
Yeah.
Now then, I'm afraid I'm going to...
What about this one here? Is that old crested hairgrass?
Yes, Coleria.
So that is sheep's fesco.
Yeah.
So
where I pulled that little bit out by the moss there. Yeah, there. That's it.
Okay.
Of how many species there are in that square metre. So even if it's not completely, it's not as thorough as you might do if you were doing a major corrective survey.
Yeah.
But as I said, there are It's pretty good. What do you got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. That's about right. 33.
34. 34. That's
Yeah.
pretty good,
That's
actually.
pretty good.
Because we didn't actually spend a lot of time choosing that, did we?
No.
We wasn't any fiddling, really. We just,
No, we just
faffed
went
around
for it.
for 5 or 10 minutes and chose it. And of the soil,
Yeah.
which makes this rich. That's the paradox of chalk
Yeah.
grassland. That the poorer the soil,
Yep.
the poorer the soil, the richer
Yeah.
the botany is.
But unlike some things that live on poor
that is
soil,
like if that's not an alpine flower meadow, I'll eat my hat. Am I
it's a
right or am I right?
it's a very, very short grazed one. I mean, in alpine meadows, it'd be much taller because they take a hay crop off. They don't graze it.
But it's as colourful as that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why people call this the rainforest in miniature, can't you? I mean, look at it.
Yeah.
Humming with bees was one of the ways old chalk grassland sheep walks would have been described, and on these valley slopes the description still fits.
My name's Alice Parfitt. I work for Buglife, the Invertebrate Conservation Trust, and we are really passionate about all of our invertebrates, but particularly our pollinating insects. And so chalk grassland is an amazing place for an array of all sorts of wildlife, but particularly things like bees and flies and hoverflies. It's absolutely brilliant. And that's why we're here today. So we're hoping for a large scabious mining bee. So it's a pretty rare bee. I think there's sort of under 40 records for the whole of Sussex in the database. And it likes really good quality chalk grassland with a bit of structure that has it's the plant that it needs the pollen for, and then it will nest in areas of short turf or bare grounds. Scabious mining bees use field scabious and small scabious to collect the pollen. So that's for their, for the young, for the larvae. But they'll nectar on other plants. So it's the field scabious that we've got here that's really important, and small scabious as well. So yeah, you often see them on these plants. And if we see a female, you often see them with they collect the pollen on their legs. So they'll have great big sort of pink bits of pollen on their legs. So they can be quite sort of obvious.
Here it is, Alice, here. Quick.
So you didn't actually need me.
There. Look. There. Tim, come here. There. Through there.
Oh yeah.
Right, I'll get out of the way. You get in there, Tim.
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, on the outside?
Yeah, get right in.
Oh, right.
Yeah, that's a bit better.
I'll net it, yeah? Do you want me to net it?
Loads of pollen.
You can really see it's pink, really pink.
Like a pink
Which that's
glove,
classic,
isn't it?
classic.
Yeah.
Field scabious is a favourite plant for large numbers of insects. It has the highest abundance of flower visitors and the most visiting species. That's because its flowering season is so long, and the nectar, sugar and pollen quantities it provides are large.
But this is a slightly different, I don't know whether we'd call it a morph of variety, but I don't know if you can see, but her abdomen is actually red. So this is the red form, whereas the ones we've seen before, the females have, all of their abdomen has been dark. And so this is a natural variation that we get in the large scabious mining bee and actually in the small scabious mining bee as well. So really nice to see both of the forms here today, doing well by the looks of it. Yeah, so these bumblebees are obviously loving the scabious as well. They're all collecting nectar from there and pollen. So yeah, lots and lots of insects using it. Yeah, so that's a hoverfly that mimics a bumblebee.
And a very good...
It's a very good mimic, yes. Okay, yeah, so this is a great green bush cricket nymph. Yes, because she's got her long ovipositor. You can see that long ovipositor. So yes, it's a female. And lovely green, big. So we've only got two bush crickets that are really a sort of a decent size, the wart biter and the great green bush cricket. So this is not an adult yet, so that's why we're not hearing them. So it's the adults that sing, but absolutely stunning.
Butterflies, moths, beetles and many different kinds of flies and bees visit.
So yeah, Chalk Hill Blues, they're literally just come out. I saw my first ones at the weekend, and yeah, that was the male that we saw, nice and blue. The females are much more drab and brown, but they're really interesting compared to the other blues. They only have one generation a year, so they're much later. So, but you might see them flying with other blues. But yeah, really nice and fresh one, that one. So that was good find.
You'll only see this on sunny southern coasts and open grasslands, particularly on chalk. Look closely at this old snail shell. It's covered in a sort of spinachy mastic, and its entrance is partly plugged with the same stuff. She'll plug up the entrance completely to finish the job. The mother bee inside is busy making nest cells with leaf mastic partitions for her babies. Here she is, all fringed in reddy gold. In the deep autumn, after all the turf has turned dull and drab, a second summer can come, pixelating the downland turf with the brightest hues. Grasslands which you thought uninteresting for their flowers can spring forth with fungal flowers. Bright scatters of scarlet, blobs of warm brick orange, glistening sovereigns of egg yellow and lemon yellow, and dark humps of crimson cluster in the mossy grass, as colourful as pastures in children's storybooks or the Teletubbies lawn. These are waxcap fungi, named for their waxy, glutinous, moist covering. Together with fairy clubs like these, and earth tongues and pink gills, they particularly like the oldest, most undisturbed grasslands.
Hi, I'm Phil Belden. I've been working on the Downs for 30, 40 years now, so I'm getting to know the Downs fairly well. And I've worked with the previous units before it was a national park, then the Satterns National Park Authority, the Sussex Wildlife Trust, various organisations, and very keen on doing lots of voluntary work to protect, conserve and enhance our Downs. So here we are on the top of the Downs, and this is a pretty typical spot to be at actually. It's a very, very intensive arable landscape, but away in the distance you can still see some vestiges of the old downland, the old sheep pastures, the sheep walks. So this is all fairly typical. This is the corn of the Downs now. It's a very much of a sort of like an intensive productivist crop for the global market. So there's no local markets for this. This just goes into the whole global supply chain. Barley on one side, wheat on the other. All a big corn crop. And the only other ones you're likely to see, I suppose, are the oilseed rape, that's very sort of vivid yellow, or occasionally you might even get that lovely sort of soft blue of the linseed, the flax crop. And they are basically the staple arable crops of the Downs, very intensively farmed, huge inputs needed to make them grow, because you're on chalk and you're on flint. It needs a massive input of fertilisers and various chemicals to keep the weeds down, so you get this pure crop coming up in what is basically a hydroponic farming. So here we are, we're on a footpath that's running from the northern Southlands Way area, the Ballsdean, running down to the coastal conurbation through to Rottingdean, Saltdean area, Brighton. And what I want to say here is this is a very, very intensive arable landscape, and the vision for a downland restoration is encapsulated here so well. You've got extremely intensive arable crops here, and what you've also got is you've got these little ancient relict, ancient turf chalk grass, and still just hanging on the steepest slopes. There's one over there. There's one over here. There's one over there. And what you've also got in the distance is you've got High Hill, which is a massively scrubbed over area. That's another piece of access land. Well, you can't access it really. You can get in one side through a gate, there's a little thin strip of grass you can walk through, you come out the other end and there's a sign that says no public access. You can't get out the top because it's covered in scrub, so it makes a mockery of access land. And yet the opportunities here to restore this from a wildlife point of view, reverse that biodiversity decline and create some really good quality public accessible access land is phenomenal.